Today we're modding the H700i machine learning device. Okay, all right, fixed it. NZXT's H700i is an example of the opposite end of the embargo discussion from last week. People rushed to review the product without really digging into it because there was no embargo. So we spent the last few days really working on this one, trying to get the smart device to work. And this case is one where it's got a lot of really positive features, high build quality, excellent design, and the spotlight is stolen by an attempt at machine learning buzzwords. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly, makers of the Conductonaut liquid metal that we recently used to drop 20 degrees off of our coffee lake temperatures. Thermal Grizzly also makes traditional thermal compounds for use on top of the IHS, like Cryonaut and Hydronaut pastes. Learn more at the link below. The H700i is a culmination of a lot of really good ideas and then one overreaching one. And an example of some of the good ideas would be, for example, this back panel, which has a button eject so that you can just push the button and it pops out. Now, obviously, you're only gonna have your hand there, but it's actually really nice because it makes it the easiest panel I've worked with in terms of putting a back panel on a case that has already got cables in it and having it close very easily. So major plus there, cool mechanism on the release, and overall just an extra step of engineering that we don't normally see. And that's cool. The other cool factor is the actual ventilation, which there's vents on every side, front left, front right, bottom center hole, top left, top right, and plenty of meshing on the back. So this ventilation pretty much aligns with what we said we wanted in the S340 Elite when it was reviewed about a year ago when we reviewed it. And my criticism for the S340 Elite was, quote, "Here's how we'd instantly improve the S340 Elite. Shorten the glass panel so that it doesn't protrude beyond the power supply shroud, then stick the front steel panel onto an underlined frame with mesh and cut a grill into the side of the new front panel. This gives a 1-inch depth from the front panel to the interior, and now we can actually use a middle fan intake without being utterly pointless." And they've done that. They improved all the things that I wanted to see improved. So well done, NZXT. None of these things were particularly unique ideas. I certainly didn't come up with them. I just requested them, and I'm sure they heard similar requests from lots of other people. So it's cool to see that they've done that. This has full venting up and down the side. We did tests with the front panel removed, and the case does pretty well overall, as you'll see momentarily. As for the other features, they've gone a bit crazy with the cable management. We currently have it all undone, and these Velcro ties come pre-installed. You route them under the cables, tie them back over the other side, and there's channels. Like up here, there's 3 channels for cables. There's a channel for cables here. There's a channel for your SSD cables. So channeling for cables everywhere. And then on the inside of the case, they've got the infamous NZXT cable management bar that we saw first on the S340 and as returned. So this is the cable management bar now, this thing right here. It's got a bit of an artsy flair to it. It comes down, goes in, and then comes back out down here. You can actually remove it. There's 2 screws. One is here, and then the other one is in here. And you unscrew both of those, and you can push it forward or back a bit. I would like to see this bar come down about 1 inch to better accommodate the ATX 24-pin cable, because right now, we're kind of bending the cable in a way that doesn't look the greatest. And in a case that has so much emphasis on cable management, it's just a small feature that an extra 1/2 inch would have gone a long way, because not every motherboard has the ATX 24-pin in the same spot, and ours clearly doesn't have it in the same spot as what it was designed for. So that would be nice to see, but still, overall, good features on cable management. The front of the case, in terms of cooling, it's got 3 fans in the front. They're NZXT fans. 1 in the back, and the 3 in the front are 120s, and those do pretty well because they have actual access to air pretty much everywhere except the front center, and keep our temperatures reasonable. It's in the top 25% of cases we've tested for CPU thermals, which you'll see later. Now this is where I would normally focus a lot more on all the rest of the build features in here, like the sort of mounting bracket for radiators and fans on the top. Unfortunately, that's going to be cut short so we can focus on the smart device, which is a new thing NZXT has added. So what does a smart device do in your computer case? Well, it does machine learning. What the hell does that mean? Basically, you take it and first you retrieve it from the garbage, and then once you've retrieved it from the garbage, you can install it. It actually comes installed, I guess, but you've probably thrown it out at this point, so I'm just assuming you've done that and you need to install it again. So you install it in the case. It's got a couple different channels for fans, and basically what it comes down to is an attempt at trying to listen to your system noise levels from inside the case while plotting temperature against fan RPMs, and then it attempts to generate a fan RPM to temperature to noise response curve. And NZXT's marketing materials create this mind-blowing graphic for it, by which I mean my mind cannot comprehend what the graph is trying to convey. And it basically says it's a 3D curve for your fan. So they've got 3D and they've got machine learning, both of which are great buzzwords. What happens in reality is you plug all the fans in, you open NZXT Cam, which is, it's a whole different story. You open NZXT Cam, and once you've got that open, go to the smart device page. You must be connected to internet. You have to log into an account. And once you've done those things, you log into the account, you can start the calibration process. That starts with, well, it's got 3 stages. And I'm going to explain this to you because the software does a terrible job of it. So stage number 1 is preset. In the preset stage, it tests for system idle and it tests for system load. The load is where you play a game or run some application like Firestrike. And once it tests those, it basically is checking the temperature levels with the current preset configuration. The next stage is when it does calibration. So this is the one where basically you complete the previous stage by playing a game, and it tests your levels while playing a game. It does not tell you that stage 1 has completed. It does not tell you to stop playing a game. It doesn't tell you what to do next. So you just keep playing your game because who plays a game for 20 minutes? So what happens next is it all freezes. It doesn't make any progress until you close your game, which it hasn't told you to do. Once you close your game, it will then place your CPU under approximately 80% load. The NZXT Cam software has its own load stress tester built into it. And this is an attempt to stress the CPU with their built-in stressor, modulate the fan RPM, check the temperature levels, and then readjust as necessary and develop a curve. There are a lot of challenges with this. One of them is the fact that temperature doesn't change instantly with the change of a fan speed, especially if it's liquid cooling. Fortunately, ours is not. But if you have a liquid cooler, the liquid takes longer to soak that change than anything else in the system. So that's a challenge. Another one is that it just gets stuck. And here's why it gets stuck. From NZXT, the software only measures idle levels when the CPU is under 0 to 10% load. Here's the problem with that. Cam puts the CPU under 6 to 8% load. You also are running Windows. So you've got 6 to 8% load from the software that needs you to be under 10 for idle monitoring. And then you have Windows that's probably using at least 3 to 6% on its own. So you're already going to have frozen update intervals on idle testing because of that. The next thing, for what they consider load levels, it's got to be 35 to 65% load, and stress levels, it has to be 90% above. So the software looks at your system temperature and noise performance for stress, 35 to 65% load, and or 90 above rather, and for load levels, moderate, which are 35 to 65. What you'll notice is that between 65% and 90%, nothing happens. It does not work. It sits there stuck at 52% or whatever it is for hours until you step in and interfere. So the problem is NZXT's Cam CPU stressor was generating on our 6700K test CPU 80% load. You'll notice if you are a mathematician that the number 80 is not between 35 and 65 and is not above 90. It is in fact between 65 and 90. So the software doesn't progress. It sits there. So to overcome this, we just loaded Prime and burned it at 100% and made the thing finish. This whole process of trying to machine learn the temperature, the noise, and the RPM response took over 2 attempts about 3 to 4 hours to complete because the CPU load restrictions are so constrained that it would get frozen and I would have to walk into the room and manually open or close applications to get it to progress further. It's supposed to take about an hour to do all of it. And then it's supposed to read from the cloud to get user data for similar hardware components that you have and apply that curve automatically. We have the case before most of the public does, which means that there's not a lot of cloud data out there, so it probably takes a bit longer than if you buy it in a week from now. Cam occasionally throws prompts that are completely uninformed. For example, this one that said that the CPU is at 85 degrees, which is 100% perfectly acceptable as a temperature for this CPU. I don't know if it says this for just every CPU as a blanket, but for this one, it's certainly incorrect. You're fine at 85C, and Cam just seems like it has overly sensitive, semi-arbitrary numbers that it sometimes warns you about. And the sad thing with this one is that it's contributing to misinformation where people genuinely think that an 80-degree temperature for a CPU is a bad thing. Obviously, it depends on the processor, but for something like these Z-Series LGA 11.5X CPUs, it's perfectly fine. Don't listen to Cam, and please don't repeat it because it's wrong. So that's pretty much how the smart device works. Like I said, it sort of woefully and tragically detracts from all of the amazing things about the case. You're buying a case. If you go to Newegg and you look up H700i, it will be listed under computer cases. It will not be listed under machine learning and fan controllers. So you're buying a case, which means we should probably criticize the case. Well, there's not a lot to criticize. It performs pretty well. Thermally, acoustically, it's kind of so-so, but thermally it's pretty good. The design features are great. Cable management is good. The I don't know. I really have no major complaints about the case. Construction quality is sturdy. The steel paneling is relatively thick compared to a lot of the market. It's got cool features like the quick release. So I like the case. They've inset the glass. It's not like protruding from the side of the case. It has this bevel around their chamfered edges. It's good, but it's $200. And it's $200 because it has a smart device in it, and it's got the RGB LEDs, which if you like the hue, it's included. So great. What I'd like to see is the case with no smart device. I want an H700D, to steal a quote from one of our Patreon backers, for dumb. So an H700 dumb would be great if they could sell it at anywhere from $120 to $150, no smart device, maybe even no RGB LEDs. I mean, you sell the hue anyway, just sell it as an add-on, and then be the most competitive case at the price on the market. That would be pretty cool. Instead, NZXT is trying so hard to get the smart device out there because they think it's really cool, and kudos to them. It is pretty unique and interesting and different, so I totally understand why they want to sell it exclusively with it, but it's nuking the potential of the case because it could be a lot cheaper, appeal to a much wider base, and would be absurdly competitive with the rest of the market just from the case alone. It does fine on its own merits. It doesn't need a computer inside of it to add cost and make you really frustrated with it because a case should not do more things than house a computer and cool it. And no, I refuse to agree that the smart machine learning fan controller is part of the cool it aspect. That's sort of an accessory to cooling it. You put the fans in there already. Let them do their job. If users want to quiet the fans, they can, but they do just fine as is. They don't really need quieting. The GPU probably governs its own fan curve better than a smart device does anyway. I don't trust an auxiliary device to control a GPU fan speed unless it's a garbage GPU, in which case shame on me for buying it. Oh, also Cam isn't finished. It has placeholder text everywhere. Okay, so that's enough about the smart device thing. Long story short, we don't like it, and Cam needs work. Let's go over the good things quickly one more time before we get into the thermals, because the smart device, sadly, the negatives are overwhelming the rest of the case, and you're still buying a case at the end of the day. So it's fair to go over those again. From Patrick's written review notes, Patrick says, as always, NZXT has taken particular care with cable management. There are cable channels all over the back of the tray, which are sections of removable plastic track with integrated Velcro ties. They work well to hold the profusion of front I/O and smart device cables that are included with the case, and they continue to work well once the PSU cables are routed through them. The one downside is that since the Velcro loops are screwed into the case, it's better to thread cable through them rather than plugging everything in and wrapping up the straps later. There's also a small chunk of plastic innocently labeled designated cable router that looks suspiciously like an NZXT puck, but fortunately for us, it's removable. You can actually route stuff around it though if you wanted to. The cable management bar is just as good as an idea as it was when we first saw it in the S340, and the H700i's iteration is a little bit more artistic, so not a bad thing there. The bar sticks closely to the shroud and the interior of the case, except where it angles outward to allow for room for the smart device, and the S340's bar outwards to allow room for the ATX power cable, where the H700i has about 2 centimeters of clearance. So we had to route the power cable a bit more upwards than we'd like, but not a major issue at all, and still a nice looking cable bar. And that little puck on the backside, the plastic cable routing one, is one of the examples of the extreme attention to detail that NZXT's designers put into this case. I really can't speak enough to the attention to detail. You see it everywhere. The panels, the way they mount is very secure, but also, as you saw, easy to just pop out. They've got the mushroom clips that are easy to work with, not gonna fall off like other cases on the market. Then the front panel has these air channels that are chamfered into it. So you take the front panel off and it sort of bows outwards towards the user, but the actual front, the exterior, is flat. So that's just sort of chamfering the inside, and it lets the fans breathe a bit better. The attention to detail also shows on things like these dots. They are functional in ventilation, but they also persist across the case. Dots here, dots on the power supply shroud, which don't really help thermals as we tested, but it's nice to have for the hard drives. If you had one in there, it would benefit from that. And then attention to detail and things like the cable management hole in the top. So there's no rubber grommets, which that's fine. They're kind of dumb anyway. And the top has a bar that's straight across, so it'll accommodate every motherboard, because cases now need to keep in mind that boards like Sky X and TR4 are going to have PCIe or EPS 12 volt headers all over the board. And that means that you've got to have cable pass-throughs in more places. So they just cut a bar straight across. All that is great. But yeah, let's get into the thermals. As always, you can find our full testing methodology linked in the article in the description below, along with Patrick's written review. Starting our testing only with the H700i CPU torture benchmarks, the stock case operates at a 54°C delta T over ambient temperature, removing the front panel entirely, only reduced temperatures by 6.3°C. This shows that, relative to what the fans are capable of, NZXT is relatively close to its maximum potential with its current panel and fan inclusion and design. The only way to significantly improve would be mesh, clearly, but that'd still only give you room for up to 6°C improvement with the current fan configuration. The side intakes are wide enough to breathe, and the interior of the front panel is bezeled in a way that gives them some additional room to circulate the air. For perspective, our mesh mod of the H500p allowed us to drop 6 to 8°C off the stock temperatures, so NZXT's case is right in line with that fixed variant. Comparatively, torture test thermal results position the stock H700i toward the top quarter of cases, functionally equivalent to the Thermaltake View 71, CM700P, and Core P3 cases. We're at about 54°C over ambient with the H700i, about 6 to 7 degrees warmer than the Silverstone RL06 Chart Champion, and adding 2 AF14 fans to the Meshify puts it atop the charts just for reference. Again, they're additions, not stock. As shown in the previous chart, NZXT has done well to get close to its maximum cooling potential when eliminating the front panel, a far cry from the 10 to 12°C gap of the panelless versus stock paneled H500p. The H500p operates a 56.1°C CPU load temperature here over ambient, but drops to become the coolest case on the bench when its front panel is removed, down to 43 to 44°C. That's the difference of good versus bad panel design. NZXT's H700i, although not claiming to be a high airflow case like the H500p, does manage to leverage most of its front fan cooling potential with the bowed out interior of the front panel and the wide intake meshing. For GPU thermals, we start with torture thermals only with the H700i. The case exhibited a 5 to 6 degree reduction from removing the front panel, and taping over the power supply shroud's ventilation did not create any meaningful change of performance. So doesn't do a lot for our card, but maybe for example, a PCIe device mounted in the very last PCIe slot, like an SSD, that would benefit from the holes in the power supply shroud. GPU temperatures are also comparatively good to average, depending. The H700i is positioned at about 52.5 degrees Celsius delta T for the GPU temperature, positioning it between the Shogun and S340 Elite. We already know that the venting in the PSU shroud isn't directly beneficial to our GPU thermals with this card, but it could help with other devices and will certainly aid in hard drive cooling and overall airflow throughout the case. No need to fully compartmentalize the PSU and its cables anyway. 3D Mark has the H700i toward the top of our newer benchmark. This positions it in second for our new 3D Mark test. Blender provides a real-world rendering test. For Blender rendering on the CPU, our CPU temperatures land at 37.6 degrees Celsius for the H700i, ranking it fourth, with the P3 and View 71 functionally equivalent in performance. The RL06 remains in first, as it has for the past several months now. GPU rendering has the H700i in second, behind only the Redline 06, and shows everything operating well within acceptable conditions. Finally, total system noise is expectedly uninteresting. With the H700i toward the worst end of the chart, the case is really not that bad. The worst of these cases is in the 40s, and that's not exceptionally loud. The case roughly matches the GN Meshify version of the H500p, marked at 40.2 dBA for total system noise on the NZXT case. This is the result of sticking 4 fans into the case and opening up airflow a bit. And of course, one thing not really discussed or shown here is that by opening up the airflow, you can run slower fans, which counters the noise concern. So because the case can actually breathe, we ran these at max RPMs for the front and the rear fan. We put the GPU at 55 because that's where the curve would put it. The CPU is at like 1100 RPM. You could lower those RPMs with a similar configuration and be fine, and that's because the case can breathe reasonably. You drop a couple hundred RPM off the front, and your noise levels are now down another 1 to 3 decibels, depending on what you did and what you use. Overall, the case performs reasonably. It's not the best case on the charts, but it's not that bad. It's sort of like the S340 Elite was, where the 340 Elite was not impressive. We didn't like it a whole lot from an airflow standpoint. They slapped a panel on it for glass. This one puts the glass panel on, which with a much more meaningful and obviously deliberate brush stroke. And there's a ventilation for the middle fan to breathe, so it'll do something. And if you put a radiator in the front, it's not going to be, I mean, obviously a radiator is kind of a great equalizer for everything, but you still don't want them running inefficiently, and this kind of resolves a lot of that. So from that perspective, noise thermals, it's fine. It's not exciting, but it's fine, and it's good enough for NZXT that we mark it as an improvement over the last design, and that's a good thing. As for the rest of it, case design's great. It is one of the most thought out cases on the market we've worked with lately. It's woefully, it's tragic that the inclusion of all these smart devices, like, I feel like it should come with a smart doorbell and a smart refrigerator, because they're just so unnecessary to have, and it drives the price up to $200. If NZXT, if you're listening, please seriously consider this. Consider removing at least one or both of the two smarter devices, the fan control thing and the RGB LEDs. Consider removing them. Sell the case for a little bit above where the S340 is, the S340 Elite, maybe like $120 to $150. It would be so crazy competitive at that price point. At that price point, your competition is the Cooler Master H500p. It's a no-brainer. You win. Like, do it, just please. The smart device, you'll notice, those of you watching, we did not have thermal or noise results for it in the thermal and noise charts. That's because it sucks to work with and it doesn't quite work. Cam is buggy enough that, like, you can get it to work, probably, theoretically, but after fighting with it for like 6 hours on and off, I basically bagged it, because while sitting there, and basically what you need to know to get it to work is sit there and watch the CPU utilization. If it's doing an idle test and CPU utilization goes to 11% because CAM eats so much on its own intermittently, then you need to kill processes to allow it to complete that portion of the test. Then the load starts. If the load starts and you're between 65 and 90, you need to fire up another application to get it to 90 or down to 65 so it can complete. Once you've completed, it should work. But I only have so much time to put into something before my expectation of it working exceeds the desire to force it to work. And as a consumer, if I were in that situation, I'd say, you know what, screw this. I'm either sending it back or I'm plugging my fans into the motherboard, doing it manually, and I'll be done in less than 30 minutes. That's what it comes down to. If the smart device takes longer to configure than doing it manually, and it probably does a worse job because, let's face it, humans are going to be better at that type of thing just because they know what they want, then it's not worth using. So that's my opinion on that. But the rest of the case is fantastic. I wish it were not $200. We'll see if they listen and do a cheaper version. But that's it for this time. Patreon.com/GamersNexus. If you'd like to help us out directly, NZXT, you've done a great job here, except that one thing. So please don't take it the wrong way. Subscribe for more, as always. And you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to buy a shirt that's not like this one. We don't have a Puck Gamers Nexus shirt on the store, but maybe someday. I'll see you all next time.